The anime begins with our protagonist, named Yona, who is the princess of the kingdom and an only child, since her father had fertility issues and had no male heir. That is why she was a bit spoiled. She showed it by taking so long to get changed that she missed the ceremony to announce that her 16th birthday was approaching. Her father told her that everything was fine since it was merely a formality, although the princess did not care about this at all since she was only annoyed by how rebellious her hair was. Just then Hawk appeared, who was a general of the king's army, and he told her that her hair was not the only rebellious thing about her. It turns out this guy was like a childhood friend of the princess, but above all, he was quite strong, so he was one of the princess's guardians. She started to throw things at him, saying he was not cute enough to be a guardian, and then she ran out to see the only man who moved her heart, her cousin, a boy 3 years older named Soo-won. This girl had a thing for her cousin, so she had not seen him for a long time, so she was more than smitten to see that he was taller and more attractive, so she almost swooned, but he only greeted her and congratulated her for being a year older, to then leave and greet the king. Indeed, Soo-won saw her as a child, so all the makeup and perfumes that Yona put on were in vain, and Hawk agreed that it was all a waste. But the last opinion that Yona wanted to hear was his. After all, as I said, the only one she cared about was Soo-won, since when he was a child, he was super cute, almost like a girl, so they spent a lot of time together, and since he was older, he protected and comforted her whenever she had any problem, so all that quality time made him the love of her life. The next day, Soo-won practiced with a bow and horse, but he could not beat Hak in aim since he was overpowered. However, the protagonist wanted to try. The king tried to stop her, but Yona called him a coward for not knowing how to fight and went down to ride the horse anyway, although in Soo-won's arms, which only made it even more special for the girl. Unfortunately for her, Soo-won seemed used to dealing with women, but he played dumb, so Yona spoke to him and asked if he had already received marriage proposals. Obviously that was the case, so Yona got jealous and said that she had too, but since the only boy she knew was Hak, she said that he was her fiancé. This was the most obvious lie in the universe. However, Soo-won believed it completely, so now the protagonist was even more hurt than before. To her surprise, the king did not see it as a bad thing that Hak was her fiancé, since sooner or later, Yona would have to be married. But she did not want anyone other than Soo-won, so her father scolded her since he could not let her marry him. Yona understood the reasons, considering he was a handsome guy and she had known him all her life. However, the king still did not want it, since her husband would be the next king and they were exposed to all kinds of dangers, so he could not expose his brother's son in that way. After all, his wife went to heaven for being the king's wife since a group of insurgents had kidnapped her, so he recommended to Yona that if she loved him so much, she better forget about him. To the girl, this seemed super unfair, but just as she left the king's room, she saw a shadow going after him, so she remembered what her father told her about the dangers and she ran for her life. When she entered an open room, a hand grabbed her from behind, but luckily it was Soo-won, so everything was fine. She was extremely scared, however. There was nothing outside anymore, so Soo-won tried to leave and she asked him not to, but he did not want to make Hak jealous, which was literally the only thing Yona cared about, so she told Soo-won that she actually loved him. He warned her not to confuse him that way, but it was not confusion. He even pushed her aside to control himself, since he could not allow himself to see her as a girl. It turns out that he did not know how to deal with women, despite all the marriage proposals he had. Even so, Soo-won got nervous about her proposal. I mean, that since they were children, he started to see her as a girl. Well, at least a tiny bit, but it was something. So the protagonist settled for this. The next day, Yona's birthday was celebrated and Soo-won gave her a hairpin, which the protagonist did not like very much since she hated her hair. But the handsome man was surprised since her hair seemed as beautiful as the sunset. With a few simple words, he made Yona actually love her hair, but Hak ruined the moment by warning Soo-won that the king wanted to see him. This made Yona very angry, but Soo-won took the chance to tell Hak what had happened last night, so he asked him to reinforce security at the entrances. During the night, the protagonist mustered the courage and tried to go talk to her father so he would let her marry Soo-won, but the king was impaled by a sword and the one who killed him was none other than Soo-won himself. Meanwhile, Hak was outside, feeling relaxed, but when the protagonist was about to be executed, supposedly for the good of the kingdom, Hak saved her and immediately asked Soo-won what he was planning. It turns out that while Yona was asking Soo-won why he had killed her father, Hak saw people he did not know and who, to top it off, were talking about a plan that was going perfect, so he went to ask them what exactly that perfect plan was. Going back to Soo-won, he reminded Yona who his father was, since before the second king assumed the throne, Suwon's father was the eldest son and a trusted general who led his army to victory. But even so, they chose Yona's father to be the king, despite being a pacifist king. At first, that seemed very noble to Suwon, since his father did not mind not receiving the kingdom. He even planned to continue defending it until the end of his days. But one day he was found murdered by one of the king's swords. That is, surely Yona's father had sent him to heaven as well. So supposedly Yona's father had sent him to heaven, which Suwon discovered, and it filled his heart with hatred towards the king. From that moment he started to plan his revenge meticulously, which made no sense to Yona, since that meant that the Suwon she had known as a child was a lie. And indeed, that was the case, since he was only faking a personality to take revenge on the king and keep the throne, which was exactly what had just happened. Suwon did not really want to have to get rid of Yona, so he did everything in the middle of the night and in the king's room, which was a place the protagonist did not usually visit. But she told him that she planned to confront her father to fight for her love for Suwon. But just then, Suwon's assistant named Kaishik appeared, who ordered the princess to be executed, so there would be no loose ends. But by chance, she knocked over a candle, and the guards had to put out the fire so as not to cause a scandal. Yona took advantage of this to flee, although they still pursued her and ended up trapping her again. Although luckily this time Hak arrived to save her, since he would protect the job the king gave him. Kaishik told him that the new king was now Suwon, but Hak knew that he could not have taken the throne peacefully, so he asked if it was a joke or something. Suwon told him no, since he killed the previous king and took his place. So Hak attacked Suwon while asking him why he had done it, if the current king was a very good pacifist, which only disgusted Suwon more, since he considered him a coward, while the guards had the order not to intervene, since Hak was known as the Thunder Beast due to how lethal his halberd was, and the reason why it made no sense to attack him with multiple people. And this was the reason why it made no sense to attack him with multiple people. Not even Suwon, who had 720, trained all his life, could face him. However, a guard went for the princess, and there Hak had no choice but to surrender. But he still could not believe that Suwon had done this and was after the princess, since he was the only one Hak trusted to protect her. However, Kaishik told him that he was still very young, and that was why he did not notice that the kingdom was heading for imminent disaster because of the second king. Obviously, Hak did not believe a word, and just then, an arrow fell that drew the attention of the guards and gave Hak a chance to kill the guards surrounding him and then save the princess. All the castle guards went after them, but at least Hak's companion named Minsu was on their side. Upon learning that they had killed the king, it was clear that they had to escape the castle no matter what, but the entrance was guarded by many guards, so Minsu offered himself as bait and did so by putting on the princess's veil and running in the opposite direction. Thanks to this, Hak and Yona escaped, but at the cost of Minsu's life, who gave everything for his princess. Hak took the princess to the mountains, and Suwon sent a search team to catch them, but Hak had been trained in the mountains, so they could not catch them. The next day, the people were beginning to realize that something strange was happening. However, Suwon kept things under control. Meanwhile, Hak woke the princess to continue escaping, since they had to stay alive, whatever the cost. Unfortunately, Yona was extremely tired, as she had never known dirt or pain. Surprisingly, at first Hak did not want to be the princess's guardian, which is why he had many confrontations with his grandfather. However, the king always accepted his refusals and kept trying. The reason why Hak did not want to be near the palace was because of the protagonist, since as much as it pained him to admit it, he was crazy about her, and that is why he did not want to see her, you know, so as not to lose control, and also so as not to have to hear how she was infatuated with Suwon. One of those days he saw how a prince from another kingdom tried to court her, but not in a kind way, but rather quite aggressively, and almost forcing her to pay attention to him, something that Hak did not intend to allow, even though he had no responsibility to take care of her. Obviously, the guards could do nothing since he was a noble, but Hak did not care about this and pushed him away anyway, protecting himself with a lie, since he had said that he was Yona's fiancé and that since childhood they had sworn eternal love. This did not convince the noble, since he did not plan to lose against just any commoner, but Hak told him that the king himself begged him to be a royal guard so as not to become one of the army generals, something the noble refused to accept. So he drew his sword to see if Hak was as skilled as he said. Just then the king appeared and stopped the sword with his bare hands, confirming everything he said and making the noble surrender. But at that moment, Hak ended up accepting the role of the princess's guardian, since he saw with his own eyes that the king was not a coward. Meanwhile, the princess was dreaming of her childhood days when she spent time with Suwon and Hawk. One of those days it was snowing, so the latter started throwing snowballs and started a real snowball war. But because of this, the princess got sick and threw a tantrum because the king did not come to see her. But the boys comforted her, saying that he would come as fast as possible. Yona also asked Suwon and Hawk to leave, otherwise they would also get sick. But it was already too late. Both already had a fever, so they had no choice but to lie down to rest next to Yona. Just then, the visitors arrived, although Hawk's grandfather was not friendly at all, since he was about to whip him for making the princess sick, but one of the nurses kicked him out for threatening a sick child. This was quite embarrassing for Hawk, but Yona believed that he must love him a lot to go see him when he was sick, although that was only one of the ways to see it. Literally, it was love, tough love. Then Suwon's father arrived, which worried the boy, since he could infect him, but he did not look weak enough to fall to a flu. For that very reason, instead of comforting him, he told Suwon with a serious face that he had to be stronger than the illness and get well soon. This scared the boys, but for some reason Suwon thought it was super cool. The only one who did not receive visitors was Yona, so she became quite sad and did not want to eat. To top it off, a couple of servants started talking in secret, saying that surely the king did not visit her for fear of the disease, but this angered the boys, since it was the king himself, meaning he was surely busy instead of spreading gossip. This drove the servants away and cheered Yona up a little, but in the middle of the night she got hungry, so they called the servants. To the protagonist's surprise, the chicken broth tasted bad, but this was because the king had prepared it as an apology for coming to see her late. As soon as she found out it was her father's broth, the protagonist ate it without hesitation, since after all her dad had made it. Then, the three mini-protagonists promised to stay together for the rest of their lives. So, real life seemed like a nightmare that the protagonist had woken up to. When she realized that real life was a nightmare, the protagonist started to have the same lost look, which showed how weak she was mentally. When Yona finished bathing, the hairpin that Suwon had given her fell, so in the night, she went back to look for it. Unfortunately, there was a snake there, so Hawk saved her and ran out of the place. That was infested with snakes. The fact that the protagonist had not moved all day and that the only thing that could worry her was something Suwon gave her was somewhat annoying for Hawk, since he did not really care as long as the protagonist stayed alive. The next day, Hawk got up as if nothing happened, despite a snake having bitten him, and went with the girl to his homeland, the Wind Tribe, where there were a couple of sleeping guards. Hawk slapped them for being so carefree, but they said they were just flowing like the wind. It turns out that this tribe was quite cheerful, so they were very happy to see that Hawk had returned and quickly asked who the girl accompanying him was. Obviously, he could not say that it was a princess, or his people would suspect that something was wrong, so he told them that she was a concubine in training and asked the villagers to take care of her. On the other hand, Suwon summoned all the chiefs of the villages, but for some reason, the invitation for the Wind Tribe went to the grandfather before Suwon arrived. At the meeting, the chief of the Fire Tribe was insinuating that surely Hawk killed the king and took the princess, which was a pretty serious rumor. However, Suwon arrived and told everyone that he still did not know who the killer was. The only thing he confirmed was that Hawk and the princess were missing, so he asked them that if they saw them, to communicate primarily to the kingdom, since otherwise the truth could create a rebellion of other villages. So, they had to stay united until they crowned the new king. Obviously, Suwon applied for the position, and all the chiefs agreed, except for Moondok, who believed he was going to be a good king, but did not give his approval. Suwon gave him time until the day of the coronation, but Moondok told him that if he had married Yona, he would have gladly given his approval, since he had come to consider him as his grandson. The chief of the Fire Tribe did not like this at all. Besides, the princess and Hawk could still tell everything. However, Suwon told him that there was no drama, since he was not foolish enough to affect the kingdom. Going back to the girl, she woke up and Hawk's little brother named Taeyeon prepared her a soup that was so warm that it brought tears to the protagonist's eyes. Immediately, Taeyeon asked if she was Hawk's friend, but she was not sure, which disappointed the guards we saw before, since poor Hawk was not even considered a friend. He was an unrequited friend even. Hawk arrived and told the protagonist to pretend to be someone named Rina, although that was quite strange for the guards. So, Hawk silenced them with punches. Then Taeyeon asked her what Hawk was like in the castle, to which Yona said he was rude, inconsiderate, and many other things, which made Hawk's companions laugh their heads off, since he was actually a grump. After Hawk beat them up again, he took Yona to a lady to teach her household chores, since from now on she was going to live there and needed to learn to do something at least. Unfortunately, she did not even know where clothes were washed, so Hawk guided her. But when they arrived, they realized that it was dry. He quickly sent someone to see what had happened. Meanwhile, the grandfather arrived, so he hugged the princess super happy, since knowing she was okay was the best news. Unfortunately, it was the only one, since the guard returned injured after seeing that the fire tribe had blocked the river flow. This angered the villagers a lot, but the grandfather calmed them down and told them not to do anything for the moment, since after all, they could get water from the merchants passing through the tribe. Moondok told Hawk that this was Suwon's work, since he had refused to recognize him as king, but if he did, it gave him the right to frame Hak as the king's killer, which would be the easiest thing to do. While the fire tribe was being led by the foolish noble who was infatuated with Yona, the one Hak chased away, his name was Taejun, and he was super angry with the wind tribe for what Hak had done to him, so he was kind of taking it out on them. The only thing he did not like was that with the help of the merchants, the wind tribe would have no problems, so he thought about attacking them. One of his subjects warned him that his father said not to do anything else, but Taejun did it anyway. Going back to the protagonist, she felt bad that they gave her so much water when there was barely any. To top it off, Taeyeon fell ill, so Hak asked them to ask the merchants for his medicine, but only then did he find out that the merchants had been attacked and everyone arrived injured. This angered the people even more, since obviously it was the fire tribe, but Hak called for calm, since the first thing they needed was the medicine. That is why he sent the guard who was beaten to look for it with a doctor from the forest, and he accepted the mission because he was the fastest rider of the entire tribe. Regarding the discomfort of his tribe, he asked them to trust their leader, that is him, since he planned to protect them at all costs, which calmed all the villagers. At night, he went to see his grandfather alone because the way he planned to protect them was to leave his last name so they could not link them to the Wind tribe, since if only by escaping could he save them and the princess at the same time, it was practically a bargain. Moondok did not want to, but he could not disobey Chief Hak's orders either, so he accepted his last order. Then Hak went to the armory and broke down the door for a short sword and a bow, since he was going to need it to survive in the forest. Going back to Yona, she woke up when Taeyeon was already better, and he was so cute that together, with several villagers, they ran to hug him. Unfortunately, the merchants were too hurt, so the protagonist had to go help and noticed the cruelty that Suwon was doing just to get the throne. Just then the guard, the sleepyhead guard, told her not to worry so much, since Hak and Moondok did everything to protect their family. Yona understood why they said their family, so they explained to her that everyone in the Wind tribe was like a family, and now she was too. These words brought tears of joy to the protagonist, but at the same time made her feel bad about putting them at risk, so she decided to leave the village. Just then she saw that Hak was saying goodbye to Taeyeon, meaning he also thought the same thing, so he said goodbye to the little buddy and thanked him for everything they did for her. As she was leaving, Hak was at the entrance, so the other sleepy guard asked him if he was okay with leaving the princess. This surprised Hak a lot, since they always knew the truth despite having hidden it. He told him that, obviously, but just then Yona appeared to tell him that she was going to leave the town, since if she stayed sooner or later, she was going to bring trouble. So she reminded him that she gave him permission to use him as a tool, so she ordered him to accompany her. Hak took this as a protect me, but now he no longer had the obligation, since he gave up his last name and position of general. Anyway, she wanted him to accompany her, so Hak asked her what she would pay him with or why. He would have to do it, to which Yona told him that she needed him. With that, Hak could not refuse, but the grandfather saw how the guy was rude to the princess, so he almost killed his grandson for being ill-mannered. But he calmed down and wished them the best. A while later, a message arrived for Taejun, in which they told him they saw the princess and Hak in mountains, so he quickly went to look for her. It turns out that our protagonists were looking for a monk who was going to guide the princess towards her best future. That monk was known for having connections with the gods and used to live in the castle, but Suwon's dad pressured him too much, so he went to live in the middle of nowhere. Just then, Hak noticed that there were many footsteps, and indeed, it was an army from the fire tribe, but Hak kept them at bay all by himself. This reminded Yona that Suwon once said that Hak was ridiculously strong. Literally, he was the strongest in the entire kingdom, but Taejun told them anyway that he would take the princess. These two acted as if they did not know him, because they did not want to have anything to do with such an NPC. Besides, they were no longer General Hak and the princess, and were just two wanderers. Unfortunately, Taejun still planned to kill him and take the princess with him, so Hak ran off with the princess. Unfortunately, Yona tripped and a soldier shot an arrow at her, so Hak had to protect her with his body. Even so, he managed to hide her, but he had to defeat them all to escape. So he told Yona to stay hidden while he worked, although after a while, he looked quite tired. The soldier who shot said it was weird that he was even alive, since the arrow was poisoned, and that only proved how strong he was. So obviously, when Yona heard this, she got very worried, but Hak told her not to move, so she trusted that he would take care of everything as always, but she realized that if she planned to let things continue like this, she better stay in the Wind Tribe. That is why she went to Taejun to tell him to stop once and for all, but she did it with a gaze so firm that it even instilled terror together with that hair red like fire. Unfortunately, the poison started to take effect more and more, so the soldiers started to hurt him until one of them managed to cut his chest and leave him at the edge of the cliff. Seeing this, Yona realized that she was about to lose Hak, just as she had with her father, so she ran to try to save him, but Taejun grabbed her by the hair to prevent her from intervening. Luckily, the protagonist was able to grab Taejun's sword and cut her hair to go to the rescue of Hak. The soldiers obviously were not even a little bit afraid of her, but Taejun ordered them not to hurt her, so they stepped aside because her gaze also said that she was going to advance whatever the cost. Unfortunately, she was still quite weak, so it was impossible for her to lift Hak. Taejun quickly shouted to separate her from the cliff and finish the job, but he fell together with Yona over the precipice. So the soldiers told Taejun to let her go because it was impossible for a person to live through such a fall. Due to this, he went dejected to Suwon to notify him that the princess had died after falling off the cliff, and the proof was the lock of hair that she had cut. Suwon got angry that they did not notify him before acting as he had ordered, but the more regretful of the two was Taejun, so he asked for an exemplary punishment. However, Suwon only let him live with the fact that he killed the princess and left, since deep in his heart, Yona's death hurt a little. Anyway, it was his big day, so he prepared for the coronation. Although upon entering the castle, he remembered with nostalgia the days when he went to visit Yona and Hak told him to marry her, since if that happened, he himself would be his right hand and best warrior. Unfortunately, this was already impossible, since both were gone. So he entered the coronation to fulfill the dream for which he had committed so many atrocities. Everyone who watched his coronation was surprised to see how young and handsome he looked, but being the son of the late king's brother, who was known for being a man among men, gave him all the backing he needed. Still, Suwon knew he had to be careful, as those from the fire tribe swore loyalty to him while aiming for the throne. Those from the earth and water were less dangerous, as long as he showed that he was a king who would lead the kingdom forward. But the air tribe was another one that worried him, since despite how calm they looked, they had very strong soldiers whose reaction was unknown after learning of Hak's death. Just then, Moondok warned him that the gods observed and judged all the atrocities that were committed in the world, but instead of being offended, Suwon told him that he was right, and that was why he would become a king who would do everything for his people, even if this meant confronting gods, something that invigorated all the people of the kingdom and showed Moondok that Suwon was no longer the same boy with a kind smile. On the other hand, Yona woke up in the house of a certain Yoon, who found her and Hak lying in the forest. She was quite well, but Hak, on his part, was in terrible shape, since even though the poison was extracted, he had many cuts, bruises, broken ribs, and lost a lot of blood. Still, it was incredible that both had survived the fall, since no matter how much the trees cushioned it a bit, surely Hak did everything possible to slow down with the branches. Just then, a blonde named Iksu appeared, who was quite happy that they had survived, although also a little worried about the girl, since she chose a very difficult path. She did not understand what he meant, so Iksu told her that he knew he was in front of the princess. This surprised Yona, so she asked him how he knew. Iksu told her that the gods told him, but this was something she had to keep a secret, since he did not want them to know that he was the monk. However, let's say he was quite bad at keeping secrets, since he had given himself away. He immediately told her that he was a monk who listened to and obeyed the visions that the gods showed him, but Yoon told him not to talk too much, since it was for being a chatterbox that he was kicked out of the castle. Hak, for his part, was shaking with pain and fever, so Yona asked Yoon to save him, but almost as if it were an order, so he got angry and told her that he did not have to obey her. Furthermore, she had not even thanked him for saving her, so he was bothered by the fact that she treated Hak like that, since he did risk his life for her. The protagonist started crying because everything he said was pure facts, but Iksu stepped in to calm things down, since he understood that the protagonist fought in her own way. That is why he took her for a walk, where Yona began to wonder how she got there, but he did not actually plan it or anything. He just followed the course of the river and arrived. Upon returning, Yona quickly apologized, since she was ignorant of how the world was out there, but she wanted to stop being so. So she asked Yoon to teach her more about the monks. He clarified that he was not a monk. He only took care of the useless Iksu, since he was such a good person that he fell into depression, not being able to help everyone. To top it off, he was banished from the temple by Yona's uncle, since monks were quite strong political instruments. The people listened to everything they said. The people listened to everything they said since it was the word of the gods. And if they dreamed something bad about the king, they could cause all kinds of problems. This did not please Suwon's father at all, so he exiled him as soon as he could. Then the protagonist went to sleep, and upon waking up, she realized that Hak was gone, so she ran to look for him and found him quite quickly, since he had only gone to look for his weapons where they fell. But Yona had been very scared, so she started crying with joy and clarified that he was obliged to stay by her side. This left Hak speechless, so he dangerously approached the protagonist's face. However, she headbutted him. Hak thought he was being rejected for a kiss, but she only wanted to bring her forehead closer because she thought he was looking to measure her temperature. Hak laughed and left things there, since the protagonist was completely insensitive to act like that and say that she could not be away from him without any romantic interest. The next day, Iksu dreamed of the protagonist's future, and he was worried, so he asked her if she wanted to hear it. The protagonist actually planned to follow her own will, but still wanted to know what the gods thought, so Iksu talked with them and said that they had to gather the 4 dragons to fight the red dragon again. That short speech left Iksu dry, but for Hak it was nonsense. Surprisingly, Yona understood what he meant, since her father taught her the tale of the red dragon when she was little, who became human and ruled for a time. But the humans turned against him and tried to kill him. Because of this, the other dragon gods tried to take him back, but he could no longer since he was human forever. So the gods gave part of their blood to create 4 warriors with unimaginable strength who stayed by the king's side and protected him so he could rule without danger. Unfortunately, like any human, the Dragon King died of old age, and the strength of the 4 warriors, well, was very much out of the reach of humanity. So they each went their own way and founded the 4 great tribes that existed in the present. Hak told her it was nonsense since he could protect her, but she believed that at this rate he was going to die in battle, and Yun proved it with a simple touch, since the last fight left him at the brink of death, so much so that his little touch made him writhe in pain. Yona, for her part, did not believe that her strength would weigh on him. However, Iksu told her that so far everything that had happened to her seemed like miracles, such as escaping the castle, surviving the fall, and other things. But as the monks saw it, they were not miracles, but her destiny. So the 4 dragon warriors were going to help her, because this was her destiny. With that clear, Yona decided to go look for them, because she did not want Hak to be in any more danger. However, Iksu told her that it would not be easy, since just knowing your destiny was not the same as walking it. So Hak tried to make her change her mind at night, but Yona did not want to continue being weak and ignorant, so she asked him to teach her to defend herself with the bow and sword, since she planned to fight, and if for that she needed to resort to the gods, she would do it. The next day, the protagonist could not sleep well because Iksu asked her to take Yun with her on her journey. A while later, he made clothes for Yona and also cut her hair, since he knew how to do everything, so the girl was very grateful to. Unfortunately for her, Yun told her it was not free, meaning she would have to pay, and since Yona did not have money, he took advantage of the grandfather's unconditional support to tell her to charge Moondok. This scared Yun a lot, since Moondok was known for being a legendary warrior at the level of Suwon's father, although the protagonist only knew him in his grandpa version who adored children, so she did not have him tagged as a god of war. That is why Yona praised Yun for knowing so much, but for him it was normal. After all, he was a genius who could memorize books after only one reading, although he did not have many books since he was far from society and only dedicated himself to taking care of Iksu. Still, one of the books he had was brought to him by the monk, although he tripped and almost destroyed it on the way, which made him look so clumsy that he did not seem to be a monk with visions from the gods. Curiously, Yun knew that Iksu was lying, but admitting that he knew him was also a bit embarrassing, so he changed his attitude and asked Yona to leave as soon as possible. This made her realize that it was not a good idea to drag Yun along unless he wanted to leave, so she apologized to Iksu for not being able to fulfill his request. He told her that it did not matter, since she was right that dragging him along was not a good idea. But Yun heard that he tried to send him with the protagonist, so he cornered him as soon as he came out to ask why he wanted him away. Iksu reminded him that he always wanted to see the world, and somehow the monk believed that he would survive alone, so he did not want to keep him any longer. Yun did not like at all that they tried to kick him out, so he almost burned the medicine book that Iksu had given him, but his words were true, so he did not know what to think. Just then, Hak came out of the river and started grilling fish on the fire that Yun lit, but he did not waste the opportunity to take care of the princess without anything in return. Curiously, Yun did exactly the same, so he was not the best person to talk. It turns out that when he was a child, Yun was extremely poor, so he had nothing to eat and could only survive by stealing, since the town had a food shortage. Just then, he saw Iksu walking and threw a rock at him to steal food or gold, but he no longer had anything. Surprisingly, Iksu started crying for not being able to help him, but he promised that if he got more, he would give it to him, so he left. But let's say he did not look very well because of the big rock that Yoon had given him. That is why he offered him shelter for that night, which he appreciated very much, especially because while he slept, Yoon put medicine on his head. This prevented it from getting infected and 1,000 other dangerous things. So the next day, Iksu appeared with a potato for Yoon, who was starving. He did not understand why, but he was awake when he applied the medicine, so he was grateful, and that is why he gave him the potato, although at the cost of his sandals. There he told him that he was a monk who listened to the words of God and tried to help people, but in such cold, it was quite a problem walking barefoot. Luckily, Iksu knew how to make sandals with straw, something that seemed very interesting to Yoon, so he asked him to teach him. Surprisingly, Yoon was able to make better sandals than on the first try, so he gave them to him in exchange for him bringing him books later so that Yoon could learn something more about the world. Once Iksu left, Yoon was quite sad since he felt very good next to the monk, but he could not say it, so he promised that if he saw him again, he would not be such a coward. And thanks to the sandals he made, getting food was no longer a problem, so he survived the winter until he returned. But he really looked like a disgrace, since on the way he had given away all his things, or rather they were taken from him, including the books he was bringing for Yoon. That is why he apologized and said goodbye, since he planned to go to a place without people. This reminded Yoon of the promise he made to himself, and that is why he started taking care of him from that moment on. Back to the present, Iksu went with sandals for Yoon, but they were still disgusting, so Yoon made a pair for Iksu himself, whose sandals were turned to dust. The monk liked these so much that he started jumping and almost fell, but he remained standing, showing that if he believed he could be okay, he would be. Although this did not mean that he wanted Yoon to leave, so he started to cry buckets of sadness. Yoon believed that he could survive, and most likely accompanying the princess was his destiny. So he wished him the best of luck and began to prepare to leave. The next day he had a bag full of useful things for the trip, almost as if he were a mother packing a children's excursion backpack. But he was one of those bossy mothers, since as he was the smartest of the three, he immediately proclaimed himself the leader of the dream team. Days later, Suwon's assistant confirmed his suspicions, since there were secret accounts that leaked taxes through corruption, something that Suwon attributed to the kindness of the second king, which inevitably awakened the worst in some people. Going back to our protagonists, they were traveling and Hak was pretending to be a merchant, but Yona was much more flashy because of her hair, so they put her in a bag so no one would see her. This was very humiliating to say the least. Also, Hak was very annoying and also picked on Yoon, whose eyes were red, even though he said he was happy to travel the country, and in that case, he could return. But this angered Yoon since he did not want to admit that he missed Iksu. Just then, another merchant passed by, and the protagonist did not go into her bag, but covered herself and went unnoticed, since she did not want them carrying her around. 1, because she wanted to learn more about the kingdom, and 2, because Hak was not yet recovered enough to be carrying her the whole way, since the only known place where one of the dragon warriors could be found was in a town that was on the other side of the kingdom. Even so, it was quite dangerous, because they had to pass right by the side of the fire tribe, so Hak did not want to move away when they passed through a small town that seemed quite quiet. Hak seemed interested in going to a place in that town, so Yoon told him he could go, and the two of them would escape at the slightest sign of danger, which convinced Hak only because the place seemed really quiet. It turns out he had seen an armory, and that is why he looked for a bow, since he could not recover it after falling. He also saw a short sword that would be perfect for Yona. However, he remembered his promise to the second king and left the sword, since the only protection the princess needed was himself. Meanwhile, the protagonist listened as everyone talked about the appointment of the new king, which made her super tense, since she could not forget that Suwon took the throne at the cost of her father's life. So she left and Yoon followed her. Unfortunately, they crossed paths with a couple of soldiers from the fire tribe, so they had to hide, although one of them went very close to where she was. Luckily, it was to see an acquaintance and not them, so Hak grabbed the princess from behind and told them to scram at once. Far from the small town, they continued their way for several days until finally it seemed that they were away from the fire tribe, although Hak warned them that nothing guaranteed that they did not patrol the area, so they still could not relax. Just then, Yona reminded him that he promised to teach her how to defend herself with the bow and sword, since she did not want the incident from the other time to repeat itself, where she could do nothing with the sword when Hak was in danger. He asked her if she was willing to take a life, since that was what was going to happen if she fought, but the girl still did not have the courage. She still wanted to learn something to defend herself anyway, so Hak gave in and passed her some bows, which was already disobeying the king's order, but she managed to convince him. Yoon wondered how she was going to learn while they were walking, so Hak told her that since she could not stand still shooting 200 arrows a day, she at least had to aim at birds or rabbits, which incidentally would bring them food of the highest quality. But Yona's arrows were not going to hit anything even by chance. Hawk showed her how it was done, however. He was a prodigy who did everything by instinct, so he was a terrible teacher. This embarrassed him, but instead of using words, he preferred to do it with her. And so the protagonist sort of understood what she needed to shoot a good arrow. That is why she practiced during the trip while the others slept, and after a few days, she started shooting finally. Decent. Yoon woke up just because of the sound of the arrows, so Yona asked him if he knew how to use a bow. He told her that it was not because he could not, but he did not like the idea of fighting with weapons, since he was more of those who preferred to be smarter than the enemies, so as not to reach those instances. This was his way of fighting, and Yona had to discover hers, since she wanted to hold back while fighting so as not to fatally hurt anyone. However, the only one who could afford that luxury was Hawk, and only because he was ridiculously strong. The next day, Yona practiced attacking a piglet, but could not hit it, and to top it off, then she felt bad for hurting it senselessly. Due to this, Hawk asked Yoon to go ahead so he could give Yona a private lesson. First, he asked her to shoot a tree, and to his surprise, she hit the tree and not him. Now that she could handle fixed objects, she only had to handle something alive, so Hawk told her to shoot at. Yona did it, but she could not hit a single one, and actually she was not even close because she lacked killing instinct. So he told her to think that he was Su-1, and so the protagonist did shoot with fury, but let's say she did not like that. He forced her in that way since it left her exposed. With that, the class was indeed a success, but Yoon got lost in the fog, and to top it off, they were cornered by the villagers who were looking for them. Due to this, Hawk dispersed all the fog with his weapon, which only showed how great he was, but it also made the villagers able to see the protagonist's hair, and thanks to that, they recognized her as the Red Dragon, so they knelt down to hear what she needed. Yona told them that the monks sent her to look for the dragon warriors, so the villagers took her to where the white dragon they protected was. On the other hand, Yoon was worried about our protagonist, but quickly realized that the two of them were being attended to with the best care. Once they saw him, they released him immediately, but as soon as the villagers noticed the red-haired girl, they went towards her as if she were a superstar. The chief of the village replied that it was because the original white dragon obeyed the red dragon king who had hair of that color. Besides, the monks sent her so she had to be that person that the tribe had been waiting for so long. Hawk was curious to know what they would do if the protagonist was not that person, but the chief ignored him and continued forward so they could see the dragon, who was an ordinary villager with the power of the dragon in his right hand. Literally, since he had a dragon hand, this warrior was named Kija and was a spoiled guy who lived under the protection of the grandmother of the city, and his only responsibility was to wait for the master to arrive or protect the dragon power that would pass to the next generation. That is why the grandmother asked him to have tons of girlfriends to leave offspring of quality. But Kija was a fan of monogamy, although he could not even get a single girlfriend. So he was, more than anything, a failure in love. It turns out that he wanted to find his master to protect him and fight by his side. So, as soon as he found out there were intruders, he went to kill them and thus protect the town. To top it off, the protagonist at that moment was unhooded, so Kija recognized her immediately. But as soon as he saw that red hair, his hand started to burn, and he dreamed of his father, who spoke to him about his responsibility to protect the dragon power. This confirmed that the protagonist was the chosen one, so when he woke up, he and the whole town had knelt before the protagonist. She did not feel like a queen or anything deserving of worship, since she was just a helpless girl who needed the power of the dragon warriors. So she asked to borrow his strength, so he accepted at once, since this was the reason he had been living for until now. Kija wanted to leave immediately, but the grandmother stopped him so they could celebrate the arrival of the red dragon. That is why Kija went into his room to meditate on what he had just felt, since it was like an instinct telling him that he had to follow Yona. However, just then Hawk entered his room as if it were his house, so Kija gave him a little money. Hawk thought he did it out of kindness, but not at all, since he was actually paying him to get the hell out of Yona's life, something he did not plan to do, so they went outside to settle their issues. Yona immediately asked him to accept him, since he was the one who had saved her and was by her side all that time, but she also did not want to leave Kija behind, because she needed his help so Hawk would not end up in the grave, and Kija took this as meaning the other was a weak guardian, and that is why they urgently needed him, so he accepted Hawk without complaint. But the latter really got angry for being so underestimated. That is how the next day the moment to leave finally arrived, and the whole village went to say goodbye to him in tears. He said they had nothing to worry about. After all, if he fell in battle, a new dragon warrior would simply be born. Obviously, this did not calm the villagers, so they asked him to return alive, especially the grandmother, who listed all kinds of things for him, as if he were her little son going on a field trip. Actually, that behavior made a lot of sense, since she was the one who had raised him, so he promised to stay alive to be the first person to welcome him when he finishes his journey. Then, on the way, we found out that the dragons had a sort of blood connection, so Kija could know in which direction his brothers were. That is, he was basically like a human compass. The protagonist also wanted to know his name, since she could not call him White Dragon all her life. However, it was something more special than it might seem for Kija, because they had not used his name since he was separated from his parents, and that is why the protagonist being interested in his name, well, made Kija want to follow her even more. Unfortunately, the relationship between Hak and Kija did not improve, so they fought every 2 seconds. Yoon focused on guiding them with the map, but a draconic compass was very useful, so he asked him the direction of the nearest dragon, and Kija pointed first to the blue dragon, although the direction was very vague and useless for locating him. That is why Kija offered to guide them, but he had not set foot outside his village, so he did not last even 5 seconds before falling down a ravine full of insects and being traumatized for life. After this self-humiliation, Hak thought that the power of the dragons was not so great, but just then they felt the bandits' footsteps, so Kija took it out on them, and incidentally showed the power of the dragons to Hak. Indeed, it was a monstrous power, since the arm became giant and sent the bandits flying, as if nothing happened. But Hak was not far behind, since with his strength and technique, he managed to defeat them just as quickly. So much so, that he made the stubborn Kija admit that Hak's strength could be a serious thing, even at the level of dragons, perhaps. The protagonist, for her part, tried to help a little by aiming at a bandit who was waiting for an opportunity to hurt her. But after this, he almost captured her. Luckily, her bodyguards were attentive, so the bandits did not last long, so to speak. Once the fight ended, Kija's arm started to hurt as if it were a price to pay for using his power. But Hak also fell unconscious due to the wounds he had, and that had not yet healed, although that only made it more incredible that Hak had shown so much strength. It was so incredible that even Kija himself doubted his speed, and considered him a monster for fighting that way with so many wounds. Luckily, they had Kija with his arm to carry Hak, since this arm had 10 times the strength of an average human, although only in that arm, meaning it was like a wanker's arm. Yona, on her side, was depressed by the damage Hak received, so she told Kija that she planned to become stronger, so he swore to himself that he would support her. Since regardless of whether it was because of his dragon blood, the protagonist also awakened a protective instinct in Kija. At nightfall, they ate things that the latter had never tasted, since it was too poor to eat a plant soup and whatever they found. To distract himself, he told them a little more about the blue dragon and his tribe, since they hid in a place where there was no danger of receiving unwanted human visitors. With this information, Yoon was able to think of 6 places to search, but before this they had to sleep, so everyone curled up into a ball on the floor, something Kija could not do, since he was a spoiled boy who for the first time was going to sleep outside his little bed. That is why he spent the worst night of his life, and to top it off, then they had to continue walking to look for the dragon, since they ruled out the first village they visited, and another 2 were military bases that Hak recognized. So everyone contributed their grain of sand to look for the blue dragon. So several days passed in which they searched, but without success, so Yoon ran, out of ideas to search. Still, he was very useful with food and much more, and well, the only one who helped almost nothing was Kija, since he could not accurately detect the blue dragon. So this bothered him a lot, because he felt like a useless. During the night, he heard Yona training with the bow, so Hak told him not to interrupt. It turns out that she shot 200 arrows every night, and Hak let her do it because even though he wished she would never have to defend herself on her own, he wanted her to still force herself like a normal human, and Yona also sought that. So Kija only increased his desire to be of help to make life, even if just a little easier, for the protagonist. Luckily for him, the girl thought he was very useful, even though they did not find the blue dragon, and just then, Yoon discovered a new place to search, since he had discarded it for being very difficult. Indeed, once they arrived at the mountain, they realized that a kind of entrance had been created there, and Kija already felt the blue dragon inside, so our protagonists entered the mountain to look for him. Just then, the villagers surrounded them and asked what they came to look for, to which our protagonist replied that they were looking for the blue dragon. To their surprise, the village chief played dumb and replied that there was no blue dragon there. Despite this, well, Kija continued to feel the presence of the dragon, so the protagonist pretended to be an exhausted traveler so they would give her asylum for a little while. The chief accepted, but warned them not to go around the area, since it was a labyrinth, and well, they were not responsible if they got lost. This only proved that they were hiding something, so they all explored the cavern to look for the dragon. Thanks to Yoon, who made a map, they did not get lost, but they did not find the dragon either. So, Kija was extremely extremely confused. He did not understand why the dragon did not show himself, if supposedly they were anxiously waiting for the moment to arrive to leave with their master. Unfortunately, that did not seem to be the case, and to top it off, they started to feel gazes, so they decided to return to the little room they were given. However, Yona saw a little squirrel and followed it to a secret passage. Here she found a man who had promised to guide her back to her friends, but it seemed he was taking her deeper and deeper into the cavern, so she tried to escape. Unfortunately, the man had grabbed her, so it seemed it was her end. However, a masked boy appeared and scared the villager away. He seemed different to the protagonist, and he did take her back to her friends, who were very worried about her. Curiously, Kija told them that that guy was the blue dragon, but instead of joining our protagonists, he ran away. It turns out that when he was born, they immediately put a mask on him before the power of his eyes awakened, which was the manifestation of the blue dragon's power. In that village, that power was a curse, and they did not let him leave. Even so, he escaped in search of friends, but his guardian named Ao pulled him back and yelled at him for going out when he knew perfectly well that he did not have permission to do this. It turns out that his mother took her own life when she found out that her son inherited the dragon's power, so the former dragon had to take charge of him. The legend said that if they saw the dragon's eyes, they turned to stone, which was not true, but still Ao told him not to get close to others, since he was still cursed by those eyes. Thanks to that, the blue dragon could see very far and thus detected enemies who went to look for him, trying to steal the dragon's power. But, well, Ao started to go blind with the passage of time, as if he were passing the power of his eyes to the new generation. While he grew up, Ao had to protect the village, and it was not very difficult, thanks to the fact that he was very strong, even though he could hardly see. The mini blue dragon did not understand why he used a sword if he could use his eyes, but Ao warned him never to use that cursed power, since it would have side effects that would leave him defenseless. That is why he always had to use a sword. The mini blue dragon thought that maybe that way he would be accepted in the village, but Ao looked at him with a face of, "Don't get your hopes up. This dragon only sought a friend," and somehow he had that in Ao, since he was the only one who was not afraid of him. However, with the passage of time, Ao lost strength until he went completely blind. It was like a blessing for him, since he was finally free from the dragon's power, meaning he was free, but at the same time he cried for the mini blue dragon, since he was going to leave him alone in a town that despised him. The only thing he could keep were some bells that he picked up from some bandits, and that Ao liked, since he could follow him just by the sound, so he kept them. But well, the town started speaking ill of Ao, because he lived much longer than the other dragon warriors. The blue dragon just listened, but just then he saw a group of soldiers approaching the village, and he was still too small to defeat them with a sword, so he decided to use his eyes for the first time, which resulted in a one-sided massacre, truly demonstrating that the power of the blue dragon's eyes was a serious matter. Returning to the present, the blue dragon was confused because his eyes were burning, and he heard a voice that told him to protect the king as soon as he touched Yona. He also thought Kija was the white dragon, but he had no idea what that white dragon was, nor the king, so that is why he escaped. Meanwhile, Kija and Hak were extremely angry with that villager who almost took her to the slaughterhouse, but the most important thing was to find out why the blue dragon had escaped. Yun quickly deduced that Kija's village was an exception, since even to him it seemed too fragile to arrive and take the white dragon as if nothing happened. It was obvious that in the blue dragon's village they did not worship dragons or red hair, so they were intruders. Even so, Yona wanted to return to the passage to try to convince the blue dragon to go with them, so all her bodyguards went after her. So she told Hak to stay, since Yun knew the way and Kija could already feel the dragon, and someone, well, would have to watch the rear, so he was the only one who could do that job. Hak accepted his role, but made it clear that she had to return safely, otherwise he would never leave her, and would become very annoying by being by her side. Yona promised that she would return safe and sound, but mostly because she did not want him so close. So Yun pitied poor Hak, who was friend-zoned all the time. By coincidence, they had been observing them from the beginning, so Hak had work to do, and Kija also realized that they were being followed. Then, he told the protagonist and Yun to go into the secret passage, the two of them, since he would stay, guarding the entrance. But more than anything, it was keeping the villagers at bay who were there without good intentions. Meanwhile, the blue dragon realized that someone was coming, so he thought they were intruders. However, Yona did not feel he was a threat, so she talked to him calmly. First, she asked his name, but he had none, and well, he did not want to talk either, so he threatened her to leave, although just by threatening her, his hands started shaking for some reason. Yona clarified that she was not his enemy. She was just a girl who sought to get the strength of the 4 dragon warriors to save herself and her friends. That is, she basically wanted to be his friend. However, the blue dragon believed he was cursed, and that is why he asked them to leave. Yona listened to him, but before leaving, she told him that she did not believe he was cursed. since his hand was quite warm when he saved her. That is, he was a very kind person. Even so, the blue dragon let her go. So he started to feel as if his heart were being crushed into little pieces. Upon leaving, they were surprised that the villagers had them surrounded, and one of them even went headfirst to attack them. Then, Kija gave him a punch as punishment for having forgotten his task as descendants of the dragons. However, Yona asked him to be a little gentle. He promised her that he would never go serious against rookies. However, everyone saw how he hit him with the arm with the strength of 10 men. Unfortunately, an earthquake caused a collapse in the caves, and our protagonists were trapped together with the villagers. So Hawk went into despair and tried to dig to get to the other side, since he did not want to lose Yona for anything in the world. Then he prayed to the second king not to take her from his side. Meanwhile, our protagonist woke up intact, thanks to Kija, but the villagers panicked, since now they were trapped with two dragons they detested. Yona asked them why. So much hate. Then they told that they abhorred them for forcing them to live in that hole, since they always sought the power of the dragons. And even if another baby died, he took his place. So all the villagers lived with the fear that their son would be the next blue dragon. Sooner rather than later, Kija got sick of their nonsense and told them to step aside to finish. But just then the blue dragon appeared, which made the villagers nervous, and that is why they knocked off his mask by accident. Although instead of seeing cursed eyes, to our protagonist, they appeared simply beautiful. The villagers got even more hysterical and started saying that they would turn into stones if they looked him in the eyes, which was not true. But even so, the blue dragon closed his eyes and put his mask back on. Then he grabbed the axe, and instead of filleting the villagers, who well deserved it, he started chipping the wall, since there was a faster exit there than crossing the mound of rubble. Due to this, the protagonist grabbed a knife and helped as she could, so Yoon told everyone to help instead of standing there with fear. On his side, he was already getting tired of chipping the rubble, since it was too hard. But just then, the chief of the villagers appeared, and the others who were worried about those who were trapped. Hawk noticed immediately that the chief was hiding something from him, so he told him to tell him quickly so they could save his buddies. Now, returning to the princess, she started to get dizzy from the lack of air, so the dragon took her to his room, where she told him again that he was quite kind, since despite how much they hated him, he only worried about his people, and that is why he came out to help. She felt so sorry for how they treated him that Yona started to cry and told him that she only sought to help him. But first, they had to get out of there. She also understood what it was like to be locked up, since she had lived 15 years inside the castle. But well, something so ugly happened to her that forced her to live life and experience hunger or dirtiness. Even so, she always wanted to keep living, so she trusted that the blue dragon also wanted that, and that is why. She asked him to accompany her so that he could see the outside world by her side. There, he did not have to be treated as a cursed being, meaning he could be himself, which left the blue dragon speechless. With all this said, they went back to digging, but Hack broke the door first, although he did it with so much force that he almost threw a stone at the protagonist unintentionally. So Kija stepped up and stopped him head-on for her, but Hawk ignored him and went straight to hug the protagonist, since he was very worried about her. Once they left, Yona came to offer the blue dragon a little escape with her and become friends, something that this time the dragon did accept, because after all, making friends was always his dream since childhood. In this way, the blue dragon left his town and also all his past behind, since from that moment on, he was a completely new person. Now only two dragons were missing, but they had to rest a bit first, since Kija had been digging for too long, so he fainted from exhaustion. Hawk put a little blanket over his face as if he were dead, but he got up angry to clarify that he was not going to get rid of him yet. Luckily, now they had another dragon to look for the others, but he was on a different wavelength, basically because he was a rookie as a dragon, and Kija was moved and promised to teach him everything he knew. However, the blue dragon ran away. In reality, he was not scared or anything like that, but the dragon went to the lake to look for a fish and give it to Kija, since he needed to eat to recover. Yoon was surprised that he found the lake from so far away, so the dragon told him that he had seen it. So our protagonists discovered the great vision the blue dragon had. Unfortunately, immunity to cold was something he did not have, so they took off his wet clothes and started a bonfire to warm up at the same time they prepared the food. Although let's say the blue dragon was kind of weird, since he curled up literally with part of his clothes. Even so, now he was one more friend, so Yona asked him his name, but well, he did not have one. That is why now the protagonist had the task of giving him one, but well, she could not think of anything. Hours later, we see that Hawk went to see the princess to tell her that now he would no longer separate from her, since he would start treating her a little more casually. But well, she forbade it, since he was her guardian, and at least she expected him to continue treating her like a princess. She literally told him that she was not interested in how the rest of the world treated her. As long as Hawk continued to recognize who she was and where she came from, income, something Hawk accepted without problems, since he never intended to forget the order of the second king that he was still fulfilling. On the other hand, the blue dragon was looking at the stars. So our protagonist saw him and realized that he was like the moon. He just saved her and followed her in the cave as if he were a light. So she approached him and told him that from that day on, he would be called Shin-Ah, which meant moonlight. That name made him quite happy, so that was the happiest night of his life. But the next day, Kija woke up better and started to feel the presence of the green dragon, meaning they had to go back to work. Days later, they continued with their journey to now look for the green dragon. But well, they realized that they could not go in a straight line, because if they did, they would pass through the castle. That is why they went around and used Shin-Ah's vision to advance only when there were no people, which was quite useful, because that way they avoided surprises. Thanks to this, they quickly reached a town that seemed like a ghost town, where they found a lot of people on the verge of death. Yoon explained to them that this town was abandoned by the kingdom and the 4 great tribes, since that territory was administered by the fire tribe, and its chief only invested more and more money in the army, even though many towns were desolate like this one, or even like the town where Yoon lived when he was little. Just then, a super malnourished and thirsty man asked him for help, so Yoon gave him water and a fruit, but told the protagonist not to get close, since she could get infected with the disease he had. Even so, Yona approached him to comfort him, but suddenly he started talking about the king again, since he was their only hope for things to change. Since with the second king, they only lost territory and the towns ended up abandoned, something that affected the protagonist quite a bit. But well, she could not say a word since it was the truth. That is why she went, to cry alone for a little while. However, Hawk defended the king, since even though he was a pacifist, he was not a coward. He only hid his wounds from the rest so they would not worry. Had he been a simple coward, Hawk would never have served him. But well, he continued to take care of the princess just as he ordered him, because he recognized him, and that is why he would never forget him. The protagonist heard this and could not help but cry, but the anger was still boiling in her blood. So, at night, she continued shooting arrows until exhaustion, although it was exactly the opposite of what her father wanted for her, since he always forbade her to use weapons. On the other hand, General Juntae and the leader of the Earth Tribe were rotting from boredom, since the second king's mandate, there were no wars, and he missed those times because he was known and adored as a god of war. Despite this, his servant reminded him that Hak defeated him at the tender age of 13, so he got quite angry. But just then the king arrived and called him. Seeing him, he was surprised and could not help thinking that it was very strange the way he came to the throne, since the king had died mysteriously, and the princess disappeared together with Hak. But he was still the son of a general he admired. Another weird thing was that he traveled with very few people, so he thought. He came on a top secret mission. However, he only wanted to have tea with Gontae. That is why the only thing he did was admire the tea that Jontae's wife made. But the other general named Judo got annoyed because he believed it was low-quality tea. Suwon liked it. Then Jontae took the opportunity to tell Judo that he had to be more flexible, otherwise he was going to stay single like now, which bothered him because it was something that really hurt him. That is why. They almost came to blows, and Suwon told him to pay attention, so Juntae thought he was going to tell him something important, but well, nothing. He only congratulated him again for the tea. This disappointed Juntae, so he asked Suwon what he thought of the second king, who only knew how to avoid conflicts by giving away territory of the kingdom. If this was the case, he planned to start a rebellion, so he asked him if everything he said at his coronation was true. Suwon limited himself to saying yes, everything is true, which left Juntae even more disappointed, since he saw no spirit in Suwon. While they were walking, Suwon saw a little stone that Juntae thought was useless, but well, he thought it was quite pretty. Unfortunately, in the mine they only looked for iron, so they had the rock as a cheap ornament. Juntae got tired of talking nonsense and returned to his room, which was a lack of respect towards the king, so his servant apologized to Suwon and clarified that the rebellion thing was not true, simply that Juntae was depressed due to the lack of action. So Suwon sent the servant to notify Juntae to prepare for war. He got excited and asked against whom, although he did not really care. He only wanted to go fight whoever. However, the fight would be in a festival, meaning a kind of drill. The disappointment was such that he almost started punching him, but Judo stopped him, although he thanked Gontae, since Judo also almost punched Suwon, since it was not a time for games. That is why Gontae said he would not participate. However, his servants looked very disappointed, since they admired him too much, and that is why Gontae had no choice but to play along with the king, as if doing a festival was not enough of a show. They also dressed them in super flashy clothes that, to top it off, were heavy due to the ornaments of those cheap stones of the Earth Tribe. Unfortunately, for Juntae, it was his wife who designed the outfits, so he could not simply take them off, and that is it. Regarding the drill rules, they were simple. Everyone Everyone had a plate on their head, and if they broke it, you lost. Each person had a role, which was commoner, noble, and king. Commoners could attack kings, but not nobles. Nobles could attack commoners, but could not break the king's plate. And finally, kings could only break nobles' plates. Just then, General Judo was a noble, so Guntei told him they could fight, since he was the king of the red team. However, he did not plan to act on his own, since he had to obey his king of the white team. Suwon took it as a joke, since he believed that men became stronger in war. Despite this, Suwon's childhood friend, that is, Hawk, had the strength of 1,000 men without needing to have even gone to war. So yes, he was a tiger. Suwon was like a bunny, but Judo told him that he was only basing it on what his eyes told him, and was not always so accurate. Juntei did not understand what he meant, so he decided to see it on the battlefield. But when Suwon came out to the front, he ran away, and ended up sending his commoners to go after Juntei. These offered their plates to be broken, since they could not fight against the person they admired so much. But Juntei did not plan to win with such a dirty trick, so he ordered them to fight as if their lives depended on it. Unfortunately, he could not attack them because they were commoners, so one of his nobles proved that they were not there for nothing. However, he got careless, and a noble from the white team ended up breaking his head. Juntei stopped messing around and went hunting for the nobles of the white team, so Judo went to stop him for a while. However, out of nowhere, a lot of dust rose and Judo left. Just then, Juntei saw how Suwon kept running like a little girl, but out of nowhere, the nobles chasing him hit their heads themselves, which could seem like a coincidence, but well, it was too much to be one. That is why he went after him, and out of nowhere, Suwon stared at him with eyes that were not those of a rabbit, to then accidentally hit a noble's sword, causing that sword to almost fall on Juntei's head. If he had not noticed, he would have lost. That is, Suwon could be much more dangerous than believed. Indeed, Suwon was playing dumb, but he did it so well that Juntei struggled to see him as a threat, since he spent his time running from one place to another. Due to this, Juntei went straight towards him to test his strength, and no matter how much he kept saying he attacked too hard, he managed to block the blows with precision, so Suwon managed to stall until he was left alone. He had literally humiliated him in strategy to leave Juntei alone at the end. They even offered him the option to revive his army, but he refused because in real life, people do not revive. That is, if he stayed in that situation, he only had to fight until they finished him off, but taking everyone he could with him. That is why he fought with everything against Suwon, although just then he slipped and hit his head against Guntei's sword. So in the end, he ended up losing. This was a quite ridiculous way to lose, so his commoners had to break Juntei's plate, although not without losing many nobles at the hands of Juntei first, which was enough for his team to win the competition, since it was not chess, but a game where the one with the most points won. And since Suwon revived people, he also awarded more points. Juntei, for his part, did not know if Suwon was a great king or just a lucky fool, but days later, his wife went happily to tell him that the neighboring kingdom was anxious for the tea with flower aroma he had. The wife was a bit worried because her plantation was not enough for a whole country, but Suwon told her that it could grow little by little. Besides, a good is more precious depending on how exclusive it is, so her tea would be even more valuable. A similar case happened with the stones, since everyone saw Juntei fight with those stones on him, and thanks to this, all the villagers of the Earth tribe and nobles from other lands wanted to obtain them. That is, now they could sell what they previously considered waste. Juntei realized that everything was planned by Suwon, but well, he was already gone by the time he noticed. Anyway, he confirmed that Suwon was a meticulous king and with a lot of potential, so he became anxious to see what Suwon would achieve in the future. Returning with our protagonists, they arrived at the port city of Awa, where the Green Dragon was. First of all, Yun wanted a few things to restock, but they could not take Yona or one of the dragons since they were too flashy, especially Shin-Ah, who had a mask on, his whole face, so Hawk offered to go alone, taking advantage of the fact that he already knew the place, since he went there with his grandfather as a child. Yona wanted to go with him, but she looked super tired from so much effort and sleepless from practicing with the bow, so he told her to stay or she was going to get old from lack of sleep. Yona turned very red and agreed to rest, but well, this did not take away the fact that that ability Hawk had to notice everything about her annoyed her a lot. Once he entered the city, he noticed that one of the people had a gloomy look, which was a sign that something was happening. He just saw some guards trying to take a girl in broad daylight, so he thought about helping her. However, he hesitated since it could bring trouble to Yona if he attracted too much attention. In the end, he went to punch the guard anyway, but not only one, since a guy with green hair also did the same, and that is why between the two, they escaped. This green-haired guy was surprised that there was someone like Hawk in the town, so he introduced himself as Jeha, but well, as soon as Hawk took his eyes off him, he disappeared as if the wind carried him away. It turns out that he was very fast thanks to his legs that could almost fly. And not only that, but he was was a pirate under the orders of a grandmother named Jigang. Jaeha told her that he escaped from some guards, but also from the presence of the blue and white dragons, since he was the green dragon. But well, he did not want to join them for anything in the world. Returning to Hawk, he received a big scolding for not bringing anything they asked for, even though he was in the city all day. But instead of telling them what had happened, he simply told them that time passed without him noticing, so as not to worry them. The next day, Hawk went back to the city alone, although the others also went on their own, since they did not trust Hawk 100% to bring the things. Just then, they found a ship run aground next to a cliff, which could only mean that it was hiding, meaning it was a pirate ship. Meanwhile, Hawk ran into Jaeha again, so he told him to go to a more private place to talk, since he was being chased. Although he did not say that the protagonist and the other two dragons were chasing him. Even so, Hawk was able to get interesting information, since Jaeha told him that the town was under the orders of a governor named Kumji, who had shady business and no one could do anything to stop him, since he had control of all the guards. That is why they abused their power in the city as if they were gods. Hawk could not talk much because he was a bodyguard, although he himself decided his fate. Just then, Yoon and the protagonist saw him, but since he was in a brothel in broad daylight, well, they scolded him, or at least Yoon, since the protagonist told him, "I understand, you have needs," something that only made Hawk even angrier. To top it off, Jaeha disappeared again, so he had no alibi whatsoever. For his part, Kija did not miss the opportunity to scold him too, but just then they ran into some guards, so Hawk hid them all so they would not be seen. Our protagonists did not understand what was happening. Then he confessed that he had a run-in with the guards, and just then the girl he saved passed by. Then she recognized him and thanked him again. Hawk asked her to talk in a more secluded place, and once they were at her workplace, he asked her why she was still walking in the same place as the previous afternoon. However, the girl had no choice since she worked there. This was the daily grind, and they could not do anything, because no matter how much everyone in the town suspected Kumji's shady business, they could not do anything to stop him. The protagonist was shocked to hear everything the inhabitants of this city suffered, and she believed everything, because even she noticed the gloomy look of the citizens. Yoon thought that the pirates had something to do with it, but, well, they actually only fought against Kumji's ships. That same night, the pirates attacked a ship in the city that was transporting prohibited contraband substances, so they burned everything. But, well, it was not an easy job, since they were forbidden to hurt the guards, while the soldiers did attack lethally. That is why the pirates usually complained, but Gigang told them to shut up, since she was like a mother to everyone and did not want to have homicidal children, which moved everyone and convinced them to continue doing things as she said. Then we see that Jaeha started talking to the grandmother, since she wanted to know what he would do with the guys who were looking for him. However, his decision had not changed. He did not plan to abandon the pirates because, when he escaped from the Green Dragon's village, he wandered for a long time until he arrived with them, who received him with open arms and did not tell his secret power to anyone. Speaking of strong people, Gigang asked if he knew anyone interesting, and just then Jaeha remembered Hawk, so he decided to invite him to join the pirates since he was strong and handsome, literally everything he liked. That is how the next day Jaeha went hunting, which gave Hawk a shiver. Unfortunately for our protagonist, she witnessed some guards doing their thing in a place they had passed by, but no matter how much they wanted to do something, Yoon stopped them so they would not attract attention, and well, the protagonist agreed that it was a better decision to stay out of it. Just then Hawk noticed something he did not like at all, so he went off on his own since he saw his wanted poster and it was ridiculously ugly. Jaeha also saw it, and well, he was delighted, but well, the drawing they made of him was not good either, so they both teamed up to burn the portraits. Taking advantage of the fact that he was nearby, Jaeha remembered that they wanted to recruit him, so he asked him to go to another place without people. But well, Hawk no longer wanted misunderstandings, so he ended up refusing. Due to this, Jaeha promised not to take him to a brothel again, but said that he loved him madly because he was very strong and handsome, something that only gave Hawk the creeps. So now he wanted less to do with Jaeha. This guy was very pushy, so Hawk had to punch him with all his strength. But to his surprise, Jaeha got up with a bloody face. But well, he got up, so Hawk preferred to run from the pervert in front of him. This one chased him because he did not see himself losing in a race. However, he immediately hid when he felt the presence of the dragons. Unfortunately for him, he slipped on one of the beams and fell right in front of Kija. So, returning to our protagonists, Hawk finished tearing off another portrait that was very close to the place they ignored. Then, they went in to see how things turned out, and noticed that a little boy had been beaten until they left him stiff. So, Yona started crying out of helplessness and swore that she would do everything possible to prevent this from happening. Again, since these atrocities were happening even before her father died. So, in a way, it was also her responsibility. Jaeha, for his part, took advantage of the fact that he fell into a jar and could not not move to take him to the protagonist, but he freed himself and said not to obey orders from his supposed mistress. Kija asked why, if they lived to serve the king. However, Jaeha saw it as a very sad destiny to be a victim of his dragon blood, so he refused to let anyone else make his decisions. That is why he escaped and tried to convince Hawk again. This time, he was quite clear, deciding that he only wanted to invite him to join the pirates. But, well, he refused again because he already had someone else to protect. Just then, Yona appeared by surprise and Jaeha's blood started to boil. Since he did not want to serve her, the blood forced him to kneel, which worried the waifu. However, she quickly noticed that he was the green dragon. This surprised Hak, but it was true, although Jaeha clarified that he did not plan to obey her just because that was what he had been preparing to say. All that time, since he thought the king he was waiting for was a very powerful man. However, she was a very beautiful girl. Still, he did not plan to do anything just by the will of his blood, so he warned her that he did not plan to go with her. But well, the protagonist had no intention of forcing him. She asked, and if they wanted to accompany her, she promised that she would not insist anymore. So this surprised Jaeha quite a bit, but he decided to take advantage of the bug and continue recruiting Hak, which was perfect for the protagonist, since she wanted to meet the boss of the pirates who fought against Kumji, since she was still trembling with anger after seeing how an innocent child was murdered. Jaeha was surprised to see her determination, so he took her, since after all his real intention was to take Hak, and if he went, well, he had no problem adding a few more allies. That night, everyone made their preparations to go together, but well, Hak was annoyed because he was not given the option to choose. Yona blushed, but admitted that things were very different with him, so Hak smiled very strangely, since it was a way of saying that he was special. The next day, Gi Gang saw everyone and decided to put them to the test before accepting them, so she sent all her men against Hak and the dragons. Obviously, they finished them off with many problems, so well, they passed easily. But there were two who did not fight. Yun was quite useful for his knowledge and skills in cooking, cleaning, and so on, but the protagonist could not say what she was useful for, so Gi Gang did not accept her. Even so, the protagonist said that she refused to be voted off, which surprised the old woman, so she gave her a task in which she was going to risk her life and warned her that she would have to complete it alone for them to accept her. It turns out that she needed to collect a medicinal flower that only grew on a cliff. That task could only be done by one of the two pirates, but well, they were too injured to be able to do it. So now it was the waifu's job so that the pirates could recover better since the last fight. The protagonist got scared when she saw the cliff because the path was quite narrow and it was very windy, so falling would be fatal. That is why Jaeha told her that it was not necessary for her to risk herself that way. But the protagonist did not want to give up, and they also needed that plant to help the pirates. So they had too many reasons not to back down. Despite this, she started to get very scared as soon as she started the journey, so Jaeha followed her to help her if necessary, since his blood told him not to leave her alone, and just for that, he remembered that the former green dragon told him about the king the dragons would serve. Jaeha thought he was an authoritarian king who would abuse the power of the dragons. However, she was a defenseless girl who gave everything to be stronger. Jaeha warned her again to stop, but Yona was pushing herself, thinking that maybe her friends might need that plant, since if she imagined them in that situation, the fear disappeared. Arriving almost at the end of the path, Jaeha could no longer accompany her, since the path became very narrow. But even so, the protagonist mustered courage and continued until she reached the cave where the little saw plant grew. On the other hand, Gi Gang saw that the water was getting choppy and got scared for Yona, which immediately put Hak on alert, since out of nowhere, the mission had become too dangerous. This was because with the tide in that state, the waves could rise high, and indeed, as soon as she came out, a wave hit the protagonist. Jaeha tried to jump to save her, but he did not arrive in time, so he thought about jumping in to look for her, but luckily she had grabbed a root. Once Jaeha gave her a hand to climb up, both returned, and while they were doing so, her friends were starting to despair, but happily, the protagonist arrived safe and sound, although she could not hide that she did not do it alone, since the wave left her on the verge of death, and if it had not been for Jaeha, perhaps she would not have been able to get the plant. Due to this, Gi Gang asked what she would do, to which Yona replied that she would return to get it all by herself. But the grandmother did not want this, since if Jaeha had let a girl fall, she herself would have thrown him overboard. So she accepted her, since she could see determination in her eyes, and only for that reason she could trust her. Jaeha pretended he had no worries, but Hak noticed that. He aged 10 years from the worry he went through in that test. However, Jaeha also saw Hak very worried, although he found it suspicious that he let her do this test, so he started to believe that despite all the dedication, he did not actually desire her completely. Hak looked like a clown when he said that, so he stayed thinking for hours, since actually he always thought of taking care of the kingdom so Su-won and Yona would rule. It was never his intention. determined to keep her, and that is why he suppressed his desires all this time. Just then, he saw the protagonist crying and went to see what it was. And it turns out that she had pricked herself with many thorns removing the plant, so her hand hurt a lot and the needle was useless to remove them. Hawk saw that the needle was not hot and everything started to make sense, but there was a simpler way to achieve it with a little honey on her hands, since that way it would come out on its own, and he discovered it since the old man always used a needle on him, even knowing that honey worked better. Hawk got ugly angry when he discovered it, but at that moment, his mind was on other things, more specifically on what Jeha said, that is, why he applied the honey, and instead of cleaning it with his hands, he did it with his mouth, since he was starting to give free rein to his desires. This made Yona very nervous, and that is why she ran away from there. Hawk, for his part, realized that he was messing up, since knowing that the princess was okay should be sufficient for him. At night, Yona went to Gigang to ask her if she had lost people, which clearly happened, but it is, with the hope of liberating the city so everyone can have their normal life. Once this happens, Jeha could travel with the protagonist, but well, she did not want to force him, and just then the dragon jumped in to say that he was not interested in taking care of a girl either, although the simple fact that he paid so much attention to her proved the opposite. With that, Shin-Ah noticed something disturbing, since many ships were gathering at the port, which showed that Kumji was going to make the biggest deal so far, and it was very important to avoid it, since the merchandise this time were women who were going to be taken to the neighboring country. Due to this, the captain decided the point of the sea where they would attack them, since now they had powerful allies, and thanks to them, they had the hope of being able to defeat Kumji once and for all, and thus recover their lives. The next day, they started with the preparations, but Yona could not do much, since she was weak for carrying things. Hawk was training the pirates, and Yun was cooking among other things. So this time, she felt a little lonely. Luckily for her, Jeha planned to take a walk around the city, so he took her through the skies, which surprised the protagonist quite a bit, but it did not scare her thanks to the dragon blood. On the way, they ran into Kumji, and indeed, everyone was afraid of him, since he was used to taking every woman or child he met and who caught his attention. But a guy who hid especially caught Jeha's attention. That is why he went to see him when Kumji left, and it turns out it was not a guy, but a girl in disguise, since she was traumatized. Apparently, she heard of a job with very good pay for women, so she went with her friend who was very pretty, and only she was accepted. The first order they gave her was to wait in a room, so the girl went to take a look and saw how the floor opened up to take her friend. Since that day, she had not seen her again, so she started hiding with fear that she would be the next one. Jeha noticed at once that it was one of the recruitment houses Kumji used to get his slaves. So, after a while, he went to the captain to tell her what they discovered. First, that surely the deal was going to take place in 2 days, since the so-called job offer was available until that date. Besides, Kumji was too ambitious not to use every last day, so now they only needed to find out on which ship the women were going to be. The protagonist had been thinking about it for a while, and that is why she offered herself as bait, since if she sent a signal from the ship itself, they could greatly increase the chances of saving the girls. However, Gigang knew she had very little chance of achieving it alone, so someone else needed to go with her. Hawk and Kija volunteered for the job, but the captain looked at them with a face of confusion, since they had to be beautiful so as not to be rejected. Due to this, Hawk and Kija volunteered for the job, but now the captain did not know if they were very confident or simply very stupid. There was no freaking way this pair of musclemen were going to pass as girls, and actually, there was only one option, which was, well, Yun, since he was the only one who dressed as a girl fit the bill. He admitted that. He was cute enough, but it was too dangerous. Although as soon as he said it, he only became even more convinced that he had to go because he could create a firework small enough, and that flew high, so Shin-Ah could see it from a distance. So he accepted that task. That same night, Yona thanked Gigang for allowing her to carry out her plan. But well, she only did it because it was ultra necessary to save the girls. Even so, she was very worried because she did not want anyone to die. After all, those who boarded her ship became immediately her children, and this included the protagonist. She started to cry since being by her side, she felt a warmth she never lived, and surely it was because she never received motherly warmth like now. After this chat, so moving, Hak went to see her and tried to force her to abandon the mission. However, Yona refused, since she previously believed that the kingdom was a happy and cheerful place like her father, but well, it was quite the opposite. It had areas with extreme poverty and corruption like the towns she had visited, something that was not her fault directly, but it was her responsibility, since they happened during her father's mandate. So she planned to do everything necessary to help them. Due to this, Hawk released her and remained anxious to see her succeed. agreed. So the next day, our protagonist and Yun dressed for the occasion. They looked so good that it was impossible for them not to accept them. However, poor Kija could not get something similar, all because of his dragon hand that was impossible to hide. On the other hand, Hak went with Yun, who was trembling with fear. But without Hak having to say a word, Yun promised to take care of Yona, since precisely because of that fear, he made the most prudent decisions. So, he promised to return alive together with Yona. After this, both went to the job site, and just as they told them, they were put in a room after being accepted, and while there, they fell for the trap. That is, the plan was in motion. What our protagonists did not expect was that Yona's red hair would attract the attention of one of Kumji's subordinates, so he went to tell him. To top it off, the protagonist twisted her ankle in the fall. So, when they locked them up, Yun started to worry about whether they could complete the mission in that state. Just then, Kumji entered and was fascinated with Yona, who was unique among the others, so he thought about keeping her, since they had such good material that one less would not make a difference. Yun by instinct told him that she was better to please him, but he did not think about what would happen after they discovered he was a man. However, he did not get that far, since Kumji did not like being told what to do. What he liked was a submissive and fearful girl, although, well, the protagonist had a little look that was not exactly what he liked. It even reminded him of the time he saw the princess in the king's castle, since that look was as fiery as that hair. So, he asked Yona if she was the princess. She, with all the fear in the world, said that she was only a merchant's daughter, which somehow convinced Kumji, since he did not see it possible that a spoiled princess would have such a powerful gaze. Thanks to this, she was saved from suspicions and Kumji's desire, so they could continue with the plan. But well, some girls just found out that they were going to be sold, and that is why they started to make a scandal. Obviously, there were others who had been there for a long time, like Yuri, who had already resigned herself after screaming for days. So the protagonist told her to have faith, since she had friends who were risking their lives to save the city, and she only had to contribute a grain of sand so that everything turned out well. That is why. That is how Yona was able to convince the girls not to lose faith in escaping, since if someone offered them hope, they had to seize it as the way to survive. On the other hand, the dragons and Hak were anxious, even the one who rejected his blood, that is, Jeha. Unfortunately for him, Shinan noticed his dark circles because he had been keeping watch all night, so he did worry about the protagonist. He told them that obviously yes, since she was a woman, but whatever. The reason he was trustworthy thanks to that concern. Jeha, for his part, was more scared for Yun since he seemed weak. However, the others blindly trusted him thanks to the fact that he was quite smart. In the middle of the conversation, Kumji's ship started to move, so they also set off and attacked them in the open sea. This was the signal for our protagonist to free herself with the help of the little squirrel and attract the guards. So once they entered, Yun stuck a tranquilizer in them so that with a heavy dose they would hit the floor until the next day. Just then, Yuri told the protagonist not to do anything else, since her leg was injured, and now that they were at sea, it was crazy to try to escape. But, well, she clarified that she had a plan for her, friends to come rescue her. She just had to get to the deck. So Yuri accepted her advice and accompanied them to guide them on the ship. Upstairs, there were more soldiers. So Yona used herself as bait again, and Yun with Yuri threw a lot of barrels at them. However, this time they failed to incapacitate them, so Yuri was taken hostage. Yun thought of a way for things to turn out well, but well, he could not think of anything safe, so he decided to reveal that he was an infiltrated pirate. Quickly, the guards beat him and threatened to kill him, but well, he told them that he put hidden explosives on the deck, so the soldiers tied him up and took him so he would tell them where those explosives were. Clearly, it was a lie, so Yun's minutes were numbered and the protagonist knew it, so she grabbed a bow that was nearby and ran to threaten everyone so they would not hurt him anymore. The soldiers felt threatened, so Yun shouted at her to grab the firework and send the signal, which the protagonist did just in time. In the distance, Shina managed to see it, but he was too far for everyone to go. Immediately, and to top it off, our protagonist was in a situation on the verge of death. This was because the guards discovered that she was also with the pirates, so they decided to cut her in two at that precise moment. However, Jeha and Shina arrived to the rescue, so our protagonist and Yun fainted for a moment, since they had been hit quite hard. But when they woke up, they were surprised that Hak was not with them. It turns out that he was the first to want to go, but he was too far, and the only one who could arrive was the green dragon. So he only took Shina with him, so he could tell him exactly where the protagonist was. While they were saving her, Hak and Kija stayed to defeat bandits under Gigang's orders, since she told them that they could only go see Yona after finishing off the bandits and Kumji. These two were delighted to do whatever it took to see Yona, so they wiped everyone out. Returning to our protagonist and Yun, these two hid and started thinking about out where Kumji could be, since surely he was close to the merchandise, since otherwise he would not have been able to visit it the other time. But since he was not on that ship, Yoon deduced that he was on the next one. Indeed, he was hiding like a rat, and to deceive, he shouted that he did not plan to leave his ship for anything in the world, since he was the great Kumji, all with the intention that one of the pirates would hear him and wait outside. Yoon, for his part, told Jae-ha where he believed Kumji was, so he entered the ship and ran into his pirate companion. That is, it was indeed Kumji's ship. However, he had already escaped, since his philosophy was escape, and you will never be defeated. All this thanks to the fact that there were so many mercenaries that he could build an army again. Unfortunately for him, Shin-ah managed to detect him, no matter how far he escaped, and Jae-ha jumped straight towards him. Unfortunately for the green-haired guy, Kumji took his bow, so Jae-ha tried to prevent him from shooting with his kunai. However, the rat used his own subordinate as a hostage and managed to prevent Jae-ha from defending himself, so he grazed him with one of his arrows. Once in the water, he was easy prey, but in that instant he felt a bloodlust that made him tremble. So he looked to the sides, and indeed, Yona was aiming at them from the ship with her bow. At that moment, Kumji remembered the princess's red hair again and finally realized that that girl with a murderous look was the princess herself, although, well, he had done it too late since she shot the arrow straight to his heart. This left everyone paralyzed, since they did not expected her to have the strength to take a life. But the job was done, and with Kumji cold, the pirates could finally rest easy, since they had won definitively. Hours later, everyone went to the port, so Hak and Kija saw how injured the protagonist was, which they did not like at all, so they took it out on the captured guards. Luckily, they were the only unlucky ones, since the rescued girls were so grateful to the pirates that they started to see them with better eyes. That is, they had it easier to get wives, although Jae-ha was an obstacle, since he captured the hearts of practically all the girls. In that way, the celebration festival began with a lot of alcohol and food, although Yoon did not participate, since he was busy treating the wounded like Jae-ha, who was about to go to heaven due to lack of blood. Yona, for her part, went away for a while to ask her father if she had become a little stronger after freeing Kumji's city, but when she got too far and tried to return, she accidentally bumped into Soo-won himself. He could not believe it, since he heard clearly that she had died, and Yona also did not know how to react, since on one hand she remembered that he was the one who killed her father, and on the other hand, he had also been the love of her entire life. Since the protagonist did not say a word, he was the one who asked where Hak was. However, the question was quite silly, since if she was okay, well, Hak had to be with her, since he did not want to know. Anything else? Soo-won explained that he went to the city to judge the city master, since he found out what was happening in that city. However, just then his soldiers arrived, so Soo-won hid Yona in his robes, so they would not recognize her and go after her. The protagonist immediately thought about grabbing her sword and stabbing him, but in the end, she hesitated too much, and Soo-won ended up realizing it. So, as soon as his men passed, he told the protagonist that she still could not die. After all, she had to fulfill her mission with the kingdom. Once this was said, he left and the protagonist remained, crying, since she had him in front of her and could do nothing. So Hak went running to her, and as soon as he saw her, he understood that something had happened. After this incident, the protagonist went into dummy mode, since she could not even walk without crashing or eat without spilling. So she got all dirty and almost died in front of everyone. Hak immediately took her to her room to change, but he was boiling inside since he felt that he got careless at the worst moment of all, which caught Jae-ha's attention since he was very interested to know who he had so much bloodlust for. Returning to the protagonist, the hairpin Soo-won gave her fell, so the memories invaded her, and she became pensive again. That while she watched the sunset, Hak appeared and told her that from that moment he was not going to separate even a little bit from her, which relieved the protagonist, since this was just what she wanted. She also wanted to leave that place now that her work was finished, and wanted him to accompany her, although the others were watching from afar, and got a little offended hearing that she did not tell them too, since everyone planned to accompany her on her journey. With this decided, everyone started to celebrate until they fell asleep, or at least almost everyone, and since Jae-ha was playing his instrument on the mountain, and the protagonist went to see him for a little while, she told him she was leaving, but to him it seemed a bother to have to take care of her, something the protagonist understood, since she still did not want to force him to follow her. Then Jae-ha went to play some songs for the pirates who remained awake, but the songs were almost lullabies, and that is why they asked him to play something more cheerful. They did not want to sleep, however. Jae-ha told them to go to sleep once and for all, since they had been partying for 2 days in a row, but they refused, since they knew it was the last night they had with Jae-ha as pirates, and it was a dream they did not want to stop living. Unfortunately for the buddies, Jeha only played the lullaby louder, since it was time to turn the page. As closure to that chapter of his life, he went with Gi Gang, who treated him with disdain as he liked. The only little detail he had with her was that she was 50 years too old, a comment that obviously she did not like at all. But well, she would not choose him not because she was old, but because Jeha always found a new woman to go with. This time, the phrase fit perfectly, since he was going to follow the protagonist, even though he knew that the blood was influencing a lot. However, it was not only that, since the way in which Yona shot the arrow captivated his heart, so he was also following his principles, which basically were helping pretty women. In that way, he said goodbye to G Gang, and the next day our protagonists also said goodbye to all the pirates who, well, now were normal people who appreciated them too much. The boss, for her part, gave Yona some of the medicinal flowers as payment for her services, which was very useful. But well before leaving, the protagonist ran back to Gi Gang's arms, since she had actually become like a mother to her, and that is why she found it very hard to leave her behind. Due to this, the farewell went from being joyful to a sea of tears. And to top it off, Jeha did not go to say goodbye to them. However, Shinnah knew he was close, so he cut down a tree, and the green dragon fell straight to the floor. Since more than a heartthrob, he was a tsundere who planned to follow them in secret. Anyway, now that they knew he would accompany them, the protagonist welcomed him, and officially, she already had 3 dragon warriors with her. Days later, our protagonists advanced quite a bit, and the dragons started to fight over who would find the yellow one. Just then, Yona started to skin a deer to eat, since she had to become as independent as possible. Although just then, a boy appeared by her side and started drooling over how delicious what they were going to prepare looked. Since he seemed very hungry, they invited him to eat Yun's exquisite dishes, and while they ate, they started talking about what the yellow dragon was like. Rumors said he was indestructible, so they imagined him super muscular and tough. However, the dragons revealed that actually the little boy named Zeno, who they had invited for food, was the yellow dragon himself. He looked very cute. However, he accepted traveling with the protagonist at once, since she seemed like a nice person, and the food they cooked was delicious. This broke Kija's record as the dragon who had accepted the fastest. However, they still did not know what power he had, so they told him to mention it. Zeno said his body was incredibly resistant, so Hawk punched him in the face to prove it. However, he sent him flying and left him very hurt, so he seemed like a normal person. Zeno told him no way, since the weird one there was actually Hawk, who hit too hard to be a human. They even thought it was more credible if Hawk said he was one of the dragons, so he revealed his secret, that is, that he was the yellow dragon. Then he changed to the dark dragon, since it fit him better, but well, clearly it was a joke, so Kija yelled at Zeno to protect his pride as a dragon. After all, after many years, the 4 were finally reunited again, and this well touched Kija's little chicken heart, so he broke into tears in the end. Jeha, for his part, could not believe how easy it was to gather them, but well, it was a fact that they had finally achieved it. So that night, Yona and Zeno gathered wood for the bonfire, and she took the opportunity to tell him that he was very warm, and that is why they had no doubts that he was actually the yellow dragon. For some reason, she felt tranquility by his side, something that moved Zeno quite a bit, so he also became a fan of the protagonist. The next day, our protagonists returned to Iksu's house, where they found everything a mess and the monk lying on the floor, almost as if he had been attacked. Luckily, he had only fallen, and things were a disaster because no one took care of them, so well, everything was calm. Immediately after he had woken up, Yun asked him what they had to do now that they gathered the dragons, since the prophecy mentioned a sword and a shield of the king. However, he said it was still too soon for him to talk about those things, meaning they just had to wait. This annoyed Zeno a little bit, since, regardless of the protagonist's destiny, he was ignoring the most important question, that is, what was she looking for? She understood perfectly that she had gathered the dragons to save herself because they kicked her out of the castle. However, now that she had them, she could make the decision to regain the throne or keep wandering. So Yun believed it was crazy if she thought about attacking the castle being so few. But well, Zeno was clear that with the power of the 4, dragons invading the castle would be a simple task. However, she had to make a decision immediately. After dropping such a fact, he retracted since he was too weak to fight, but he had already exposed the truth. And to everyone's surprise, the one who looked least likely to dare to drop facts said it. That is why the dragons and Hawk gathered to see if they could help in any way, since attacking the castle did not seem like a good idea, due to the fact that after the revenge, they would have to take charge of the country. And this was something extremely complicated for a 16-year-old girl. Hawk, for his part, did not even want to talk about Suwon, so the dragons confirmed that the person Hawk hated the most was the king, actually. On the other hand, Yona went to talk to Iksu, since she was determined in what she had to do. After seeing all the suffering that existed in her father's kingdom, she confirmed that they could not sit idly by. So, well, they wanted to travel all over the kingdom, helping those who need it. However, this brought to mind Iksu's words. words, that is, his. I have something important to do, since surely they shared the same objective. This brought her to tears, so she told Iksu that she had met Suwon and could not kill him. This drove her crazy, since he was her father's murderer, and yet she could not stop loving him. Well, he told her that it was a very human thing, since it even happened to the first Red Dragon King after he became human, and that is why he also continued to love humans despite all the harm he did. During the night, the protagonist started practicing with a short sword, since she wanted to become much stronger. However, Hawk told her to seek shelter from the rain so she would not catch a cold. Inside the cave, he did not understand why she was not satisfied with the bow, so she explained that she did not want to depend on Hack's protection again, since she was also very worried about him exposing himself. That is why she told Jeha to teach her how to use her sword, since she knew Hawk would never accept. Jeha took the opportunity to tell her that Hawk had his reasons, since he surely wanted to keep her locked up inside a bubble so no one would harm her, which was a huge fact, and that is why. Hack got nervous, but the protagonist, all innocent, did not understand what reasons he would have to lock her up, so she took it as a joke, which was even more painful for poor Hack, who was constantly being friend-zoned. That is why the latter said that he used to be like that, but now he had changed his mind and sought to show everyone how strong Princess Yona had become. This made the wife very happy, and that is why she fell asleep peacefully in her man's arms. On the other hand, Moondok presented the new chief of the Wind Tribe to Suwon and also congratulated him for what he had done in the Earth Tribe. But well, he still did not feel worthy of being congratulated, since he had done almost nothing for the kingdom yet. What Suwon did not know was that there was now a group of weirdos led by the protagonist who also sought to protect the kingdom, and they had the same or even more determination than him to fix all the problems that the kingdom was facing at that time. And that is it, people. Unfortunately, this was all the animated content of the anime Akatsuki no Yona. And as always, I will try to leave you two similar anime on the final screens. Goodbye.